A good many of the subjects we choose arise from letters or from persons who come in with special problems or ask about various attitudes. And this morning's belongs to that type of subject matter. Not only does it represent a very common request for direction, but it is also something bearing upon our observation of the situations that arise in the lives of our friends. One of our problems today is this peculiar lack of maturity which seems to trouble so many American people. We have so many advantages, so many opportunities, such wonderful privileges, and our physical and mechanical culture has developed so rapidly that a great many persons are not aware that the individual as a person may not have developed as well and as naturally and reasonably as might be desired. We have put so much weight upon things around us, upon common motions, and have depended so heavily for security upon the institutions we have created that we have sort of forgotten to grow ourselves. And due to this oversight, we are not in a condition to meet certain emergencies that must inevitably arise in a complex culture such as our own. We did not notice this condition so much even through World War II. But in this post-war adjustment situation, we are becoming more and more aware of the need for values within ourselves which we have not properly cultivated. And so this morning we want to probe into this a little, trying to discover, if possible, how we can strengthen, develop, and enrich phases of our own natures. What is serene living? Is it possible? Is it possible for the individual to live well without deluding himself, without merely denying the challenge of his time? Is it possible for him to be happy in a world of persons who are not happy? Has he any right to be happy apart from the common contentment of his fellow man? Are we justified in searching for or requiring comfort and security in a world in which these values appear to be lacking? What is insecurity as we consider it today? Is insecurity actually a condition that arises from some common force which, working around us and among us, forces us to center our own attention upon it? Is this insecurity a kind of enemy against which we must all turn to protect ourselves, something we must defeat as we would an adversary at war? Is this insecurity something different from ourselves? The answer seems to be that it is not. This insecurity is not a common enemy, it is ourselves. It is not something which we can turn and attack, because it exists within our own natures. This insecurity, therefore, is not something for which we have to have a common sense of conscience. It is something which each individual can only correct by correcting it in himself. He is not a traitor to anyone else, because it is simply impossible for us to bestow security upon any other living creature. Security is something that belongs peculiarly to the integration of the individual. What we term common security is simply collective individual security. What we call world peace is nothing but individual peace infinitely multiplied. Therefore, we cannot dedicate ourselves to world peace without recognizing that it is unattainable unless individuals achieve a peaceful attitude. Thus, what we call security or serenity of living today cannot result from the conversion or culturing of other persons directly. We can contribute opportunity to help other persons to grow, but we cannot make them grow. We cannot demand growth, nor can we justly condemn those who do not grow. Our problem remains essentially with ourselves, that we live in a certain kind of a world. The only way we can live in it well is by understanding it as thoroughly as we can. Out of understanding comes acceptances. Acceptances that are reasonable, understandable, practical. These acceptances are the basis of our own personal conduct. What we understand and accept will not disturb us unreasonably. As long, however, as we demand from others or from situations those values which are not reasonable in others or in other situations, we shall be in trouble. We are not in trouble because of the insecurity of our world. We are in trouble because of the individual insecurity of our fellow men. And others in their problems include us among the causes of their anxiety. As long as we are unpredictable, someone else is insecure because of us. We are so much concerned with the insecurities that others cause that we may totally overlook the insecurity that we cause. An individual, for example, with an uncertain temperament, a temper that may flash up at any moment, may feel that he has perfect right to this kind of a disposition. He knows why he is going to get mad. He knows approximately when he is going to get mad, or the type of conditions that will provoke him. But this individual, with his inconsistent attitudes, is a cause of insecurity to those around him, regardless of the ways in which he justifies his own attitudes. The worrier, the jealous person, the gossip, these individuals are causes of insecurity to others. So each individual who is not secure in himself, has not certain integrities strongly developed in his own nature, is a cause of fear, a cause of worry, and of anxiety and uncertainty to persons around him. Thus, this problem of insecurity has a sort of chain reaction, and it communicates itself from one person to another, and in grave critical periods where the phenomenal situations are intense, the insecurity pressures reach climatic importance. They become critical in our national or individual affairs. Insecurity is largely the individual's reasonable doubts or unreasonable doubts about providence, about the kind of world in which he lives, and about the people around him. This kind of insecurity is bound to result in conclusions and attitudes. Serenity is a matter of attitude. The individual with the right attitude can maintain a reasonable degree of serenity. One of the things he has to get rid of, however, in order to have this proper collective attitude, is suspicion. Another thing, criticism. The critical person can never be serene, because he can never be without causes which justify anxiety. The suspicious person can never be serene, because he is always in the presence of circumstances which excite his suspicion and cause him to doubt providence, or to doubt the particular actions of those around him. A person who is bound to historical perspective can seldom attain a serene attitude. The chaos of Europe is due to historical perspective. Europe is so afraid of the future and so dominated by pressures of the past that it has no opportunity to live now. It is living always in the shadow of something. The majority of human beings who are living in their own private worlds live in shadows also. They live in shadows consisting of the past, moving in upon them. They cannot escape the consequences of past causations. They are unable to free themselves from old antagonisms, old opinions, old prejudices, old intolerances. These things move in upon now, clouding it and overshadowing it. Also, these same persons cannot live clearly in the face of the future. To them, the future is always doubtful. It is either an abstract hope or an abstract fear. We are always afraid of the unknown, and we may also build a future upon hopes that are not reasonable or practical, and therefore face futures of disappointments and reverses. But all these situations arise within our own consciousness, and the world around us, before it can reach us, must pass through the censorship of our own mental and emotional natures. And here is where the trouble begins. The trouble begins where man begins to interpret, in terms of his own nature, things that have an existence apart from himself. He takes the world condition and interprets it in terms of his own ignorance. He uses whatever attitudes and prejudices he is familiar with. And by the time he gets through interpreting events, he can frighten himself to death with them. Another person with a different attitude, interpreting the same events, comes up with an entirely different conclusion. Thus, one of the difficulties in our peace of mind is that the sensory messages which reach us from the outer world cannot and are not honestly received. They cannot be merely registered and factually examined. They must pass through the involved and complicated psychic organism which we have built. The individual is not neutral in anything. He is not able merely to accept a fact, register that fact, and live according to it. The moment he gets into the presence of a fact, he begins to interpret the fact out of the fact. He begins to impose upon this fact all forms of modifying opinions of his own. He cannot merely accept an event. He cannot say, this is what has happened. This is the way I will react to it. Long before he can come to these rather simple conclusions, he has distorted the event out of all proportion. He has tried to fit it into patterns of his own experience which may be inadequate, probably are. And he is taking it always for granted that the future must be identical with the past, and whatever has been a general acceptance must continue to be. Thus he locks himself, and what could be an experience becomes a problem. What could be a challenge becomes a catastrophe. To meet this kind of a situation means more or less a re-evaluation of our approach to a great many of our essential responsibilities. And I like sometimes to think of the way in which the old Zen masters of Japan attempted to explain and interpret many of these interesting problems. The first problem that the individual has to decide, according to the old Zen concept, is whether or not the individual is going to be alive or whether the problems are going to be alive. Where is the center of consciousness going to be? Is it going to be in the center of us, or is it going to be drowned in the difficulties? If it is in the center of us, we can control any difficulty. If we lose this center, we are gradually going to tangle ourselves into a confusion for which perhaps we can find no solution. In the terms of time, the center for ourselves is now. Now is the only moment which is essentially and inevitably real. It is also the only moment that is under our control. It is under our control for the instant of its own existence. And what we call time is an endless progression of instants, now. It is now continuing. And adjustment is the individual's sense of consciousness forever functioning in the immediate now. 5 minutes ago was now. 5 minutes passed. It is no longer now. Now has moved, like consciousness, from one time pattern to another. And by virtue of this motion, time now has left things behind. Even while we are speaking, an instant has gone into eternity. If at any point in the individual's existence he ties himself to this time, to this instant, then he is lost, because he goes into eternity with it. But if he can move from one instant to another, retaining always the immediate fact of now, he is in a peculiarly rich situation. You remember in the pact in Faust, where Faust and Mephisto discuss how the famous pact is going to be paid off in the end. And Faust makes a kind of an agreement, an arrangement that he considers suitable to his own need. And he says, if ever to the passing hour I say, O stay, thou art so fair, then unto thee I give the power to drag me down to hell's despair. Then may my fate no longer linger. Then from my service thou art free. Fall from the clock the index finger. Be time all over then for me. In other words, the moment the individual attaches himself to a unit of time, he passes into limbo with it. Thus, in Zen, the great problem is to preserve eternal immediacy. The kind of now which is forever freedom. For now you can do anything you want. But the moment now becomes past, you can only do whatever you can do. Once a thing is done, it may never be possible to undo it. Nor do we gain any wealth of understanding by vague hoping that the future is the time for doing. The individual who ties himself to the past is lost. The individual who awaits forever the future, like old Wilkins Macabre in Dickens, waiting for something to turn up, is also lost. The actual immediacy is now. The use of now determines all things. The only value that the past has is that it equips us to use the now. The only value the future has is that it is the extension of the now and presents now to us as infinite opportunity, a foreverness of now. In this now, therefore, the Zen master says, we have freedom. We have no freedom except the freedom of this decision, this conclusion, this attitude, spontaneously taken at this moment. Now we can dedicate ourselves to various purposes that we regard as important. Now we can accept the burden of our life with complete personal privilege of decision. Now we can face facts without burdening them with our own old fears or morbid anticipations. Now, therefore, is a strangely strong point of decision. It is a clean-cut instant. But man, unless he understands it, refuses to accept it as such. He shifts immediately to the future or to the past, simply to evade the responsibility of decision. So lack of serenity arises, in part at least, from man's continuous effort to evade the need for immediate decision. The individual who is afraid to face a fact sets in motion patterns of evasion which must inevitably add to confusion. He therefore loses the power of immediate adjustment, and he may well confuse the lives of others around him by this strange inability to decide or to determine the course of action. Another important fragment of Zen philosophy is the symbolism of the tangled cord. The average person is tied up like the famous Gordian knot, which Alexander the Great finally faced with the curious decision that perhaps is almost oriental. Alexander examined this knot that no man could untie. He obviously worked with it for a while, became impatient of it, and then suddenly with his sword he cut the knot, and that was the end of it. So he achieved this strange freedom from involvement. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the great Indian classic, we have this sword of quick detachment with which the wise man cuts down the tree with its serpent-like branches and roots that attempt to hold or bind the consciousness of the individual. This problem, then, of getting rid of the knots along this cord of life, we may say that the cord of life is man's internal structure. And if we toss it down upon the ground, it seems to represent a road leading forward through time, through man's span of existence. For the nature of the road he travels is determined by the amount of confusion or complexity there is within himself. There is an old Indian fable of the wonder worker tossing the cord into the air. It forms a ladder, and he climbs up the ladder and disappears in space. In the Zen philosophy, each individual is in a state of tension, or he is knotted by the confusion which ties up the sympathetic or autonomic nervous system. Every stress, every strain that we have ties up the ganglia and plexi of our nervous system. These become, so to say, so tense, so wound up and tied up, that the individual finds it less and less possible to relax. Another difficulty with us all dispositionally is that no one can be serene and tense at the same time. We cannot be under pressure and stress and at the same time move smoothly along our road of life. Thus the Zen points out the tremendous importance of reducing these stress areas to stop being tense. Now, why are we tense? Now, every individual has a different answer for why he is tense. But the most common one that I've heard, and perhaps one of the most eloquent, is simply that things are not going the way we want them to. This is almost certain to do it. We have something all planned and the bottom falls out of it. Being unable to relinquish or let go, we fall into a state of wishful thinking. We regret what did not work out, and we stand in constant anxiety about what we do not want that might take the place of the thing that did not work out. So one of our reasons for tension is the fact that things are not going our way. The question may also then arise in the thoughtful, how shall we estimate the true value of things that do not go our way? Perhaps we have forgotten that it is not the duty of nature to go our way, that the duty of those around us is not to always do what we want to do. The question that we must finally decide is, what is nature's way, and are we going that way? Usually Zen, then, will come out with this simple statement that anxiety is the result of the individual placing his own purposes first and the laws of the universe later, if at all. The person who is living within a lawful universe does not have nearly as many anxieties as the individual who is trying to be a law unto himself, a very difficult task, one which causes only strain in the majority of cases. So we have this problem also in our Zen thinking, namely that knotting or tying up in tension patterns is the result of the individual not getting what he wants or getting what he does not want. It's the result of his own plan being interfered with by situations or conditions imposing themselves upon him. If these conditions are in the forms of persons, we will resent those persons. We consider that anything that interferes with our plan is bad. That our plan itself might not be good seldom concerns us. But we may find out, as we study a little, that those plans most fragile and most likely to be interfered with are the plans which are themselves least real, least valuable, and least honorable. Actually, the more selfish our plan, the less likely it is to succeed. And also, if it be essentially selfish, the less likely it is to bring any serenity of life, even if it does succeed. We observe, therefore, many persons who attain their plans which they knew would make them happy, but these persons are not happy. The plan did not, by its fulfillment, produce any more security than would have followed had it not succeeded. Serenity, therefore, does not lie in increasing the satisfaction of our own inclinations. It arises from the reduction of the pressure of our own unreasonable attitudes. And here we have to begin the process of education, self-culturing. Nearly all persons are operating from a philosophy of life that is essentially inadequate. This means that whether this philosophy be established on a religious level or on an intellectual level, it is not strong enough to actually control and direct conduct. It may be strong enough to be considered a very wonderful overtone in our living. We may admire it, we may declare ourselves dedicated to it, but in emergency it does not stand there and support us. It means that there is a conflict in which our real beliefs are not as strong as our desires, our inclinations, our attitudes, and our determinations at any particular moment. Because of this lack of interior maturity, we cannot control the tendency to be confused that arises in the personality. So let us pause for a moment in the terms of some of the old Oriental fabulists and try to understand a little bit more about this personality of ours. There's an old Indian fable that man, having evolved upward through all the kingdoms of nature, has all of the other kingdoms inside of him. Therefore, the man, whether he realizes it or not, has within him not only his human life, but perhaps he has a group of animal lives, even plant and vegetable lives. There is within man a certain instinct to vegetate. We've all met persons who are outstanding examples of vegetables. They have never moved away from some truly vegetative existence. They have never accepted any more personal responsibility than an onion, and they never will. There are other human beings in whom various animal natures are quite obvious. We find the individual who has the temperament of the fox, another with the courage of a lion, a third with the erudition and general temperament of an elephant. Then we have the perpetual anthropoid. We have the monkey. We have the serpent. We have all kinds of different animals within our own natures, according to the fable. Now, these animals are not bad because they're in there. We have them because we have all of these dispositions within ourselves. There are moments when quiet persons roar like a lion. There are other moments when we follow instinctively the impulses of various creatures within ourselves. So let us look at our lives for a moment. We are moving along with some degree of placidity, and then someone says something we do not like. Immediately one of these animals comes out. We start to snarl or bark. And after the mood has passed, this animal disappears again. Where is it when it isn't in use? Where is jealousy while we do not feel it? We get along very nicely. All of a sudden, some one thing that happens makes us desperately jealous. And we have a terrible struggle to try to finally overcome it and get ourselves back in shape again. We consider it a real victory when we achieve this. Now, when we have finally beaten this jealousy, and until it has disappeared, may not show up again for several years, where is it? Has it died? Has anything died that can be invoked at any moment by the pressure of circumstances? Hate can come out of an individual who apparently is a most kindly and loving person. Why? Where is the hate when he is not hating? Where is anger or jealousy when we feel friendship? Where is hatred when we are in love? Where is love when we hate? We are therefore a complex creature with many potentials and powers within ourselves. And at one time or another, any one of these may come out and take control, controlling us for a time and then disappearing again. not to be heard from for some time. So all these things are within us as matters to be examined and to be carried in our minds and thoughts. Thus we may have within ourselves a number of persons, more persons than the famous faces of Eve in the recent psychological report. In these different persons, we have different levels of decision. And these different levels of decision at various times come out to complicate life for us. We are going along and someone does us an injury, real or imaginary. Instantly we decide the only thing to do is hit back. They made us suffer. Let's make them suffer a little more right now. So we do it. A few days later we wonder why we did it and proceed to try to put together the trouble that this particular flash of intolerance caused. And perhaps it may take a lifetime to repair the damage. And we go through the years deprived of something valuable or in the presence of a difficult situation simply because we had no self-control. Then we have another level in ourselves that the moment a problem arises, we settle down to chronic worrying. We can't help it. We just have to worry when we feel like worrying. So we worry. And if life becomes too monotonous or situations become too consistently difficult, worry becomes a habit, and we finally discover that we cannot even break the habit. It is worse than narcotics or alcohol. So we simply worry ourselves slowly into a state of eternal acidity. We pay with our lives for worry. Then we may find another attitude. We may find a curious kind of impractical and unreasonable optimism. We will accept only something that cannot happen. So we wait and we hope and we believe and we're discouraged and perhaps finally embittered. Not because of the facts, but because we demanded something that wasn't reasonable. So by degrees, we tie ourselves into these tension patterns. One of the reasons, of course, obviously, is that these different levels of our personality have their own little political entities, and if we are not running our lives, one of these lesser levels will run our living for us. Now, these lesser levels together make up our personality. But any one of them, detached from the others, is less than we are. Consequently, the moment we lose total control, any part that takes over is less than our own complete nature. It must be deficient in something. The part cannot be equal to the whole. And whatever phase of our nature takes over when the total person relinquishes leadership, that part is unsatisfactory and is likely to get us into further trouble. So our problem always is to maintain the leadership of consciousness over the aspects of our own personalities. Unless we do so, we are bound to fall into troubles and pressures and tensions and stress patterns. To maintain this leadership means that we must understand as much as we can about our natures and about our thinking and our living. Thus we say that in most cases it is inadequacy of understanding that is our trouble, and we need a kind of education. It is not the kind of education that deals merely with objective forms of learning. It is a kind of education that has to do with qualities of living. The end of it being that man shall become reasonable. And that phase of that knowledge, which is dealing with the problem of the reasonable, we generally term philosophy. But we can extend it to include religion, mysticism, metaphysics, whatever our interests may be. But essentially, the purpose of wisdom is that the person shall be reasonable. and being reasonable, shall be in control of himself at all times, so that there is no possibility of an action that is contrary to reason. Now, this might sound as though we were making life a little dull and colorless, but such is not the case. The reasonable is always more magnificent, more dynamic than the error. The reasonable, because it is harmonious, is also beautiful. And because it is beautiful, it is good. And because it is good and beautiful, it is the absolute necessity of our living. Thus, by gradually cultivating certain essential reasonableness, we begin to experience the possibility of serenity. For serenity is, of course, the individual united within himself. It is the parts of the person serving the total being, each one contributing toward unity, rather than attempting an individual escape into isolated dictatorial conduct. Thus, if all the parts of man work together, the good of man is assured, just as it is true that if all the parts of society work together, the good of society is secured. But if the parts of society are in conflict one with another, then society is insecure. And if man suddenly finds himself in servitude to his ambition, or in servitude to his opinions, or in servitude to his avarice, he is no longer secure. He finds that he has sacrificed security to the gratification of an unreasonable desire. And most persons who lose security lose it because of unreasonable desire, which, not being fulfilled, or if fulfilled, producing no comfort in itself, adds nothing to the permanent good of the individual. To go back then to our concept of Zen, how can we achieve a serenity of consciousness without negation? We talk to people about these problems, and they say, well, we are supposed to overlook a lot, aren't we? No, we're not. We're not supposed to overlook anything. We're supposed to understand through things. To close our minds to a value or to a problem is not to solve it. Solution lies always in one thing: total understanding. The individual who simply closes his eyes to trouble and says it isn't there is not solving anything. But the individual who thoroughly understands the situation discovers that it is not trouble. It is something else, which previously he did not know. The end, therefore, of the search for serenity is not denial of fact, but rather the recognition of fact and the recovery from error. For it is the assumption of the fact of something that is not true that lies underneath nearly all the tension that the human being develops. He has placed his own decision of what is so above the decision of the universe. He has attempted to trust himself totally to his own imperfect knowledge, and as a result, he is not able to conduct his life adequately. How then can he achieve this condition of greater total understanding of value? The Zen monk would say one of the things that is important is the ability to respond or react normally to challenge. If the individual follows his own most basic consciousness, he will generally do the thing which is next for him. He will either learn the lesson, or he will create a situation from which he will learn indirectly the solution to his problem. In order to function by this method, however, he must realize that immediate contentment is not the end which nature intends. The end which nature intends is ultimate victory of reality in his life. Therefore, all decisions which have delusion in them will cause further stress and strain until the individual stops that kind of decision. He can, however, begin to analyze and begin to use history and his own past for what it is useful for. The past of the individual is a museum in which all kinds of extinct things are grouped attractively in showcases. The individual's past is like a great gallery of ethnology or anthropology. For in his past are things which no longer have a life in themselves, but from which, as from a book or a text, he is able to determine certain values. If an individual, therefore, looking back upon the past, forgets his regrets, forgets all of the personal grudges and affronts which generally load his life, and view these past years as he might a gallery, he may gain a great deal of value. If he goes to one of the great museums, he may find there Greek statuary 2,400 years old. He may find Egyptian relics 5,000 years old. But when he goes and looks at these things, he does not look down at one of these old Egyptian mummies and begin to bewail what the things the mummy did to him. He isn't even aware that perhaps that particular pharaoh may have ultimately been one of the contributing factors to World War II. Because we never know how these chains of events go down through the ages. And one belligerent individual, surrounded by other persons who are not wise enough to counteract that belligerence, can cause a long chain reaction. But the museum is interesting because we wander through it. And if we are serious students, we use this museum to educate ourselves. We use it to find out the mistakes that other men have made and hope that we can correct them. We also try to find out the good things that other men did so that we can perpetuate them. We must gradually take the same attitude toward our own previous years. The childhood or youth or early maturity behind us, these things are now in a museum. This museum is the past. The moment we try to revitalize these things, we get ourselves into a desperate situation. But if we can use the past to find out why we were wrong, rather than to find out why someone else was wrong, we are gaining on it. We are beginning to use it, rather than letting it use us. We no longer sit around and recount in gruesome detail every tragedy in the last 50 years. This is not use as a museum. This is the desperate effort to keep the past alive, which you cannot do. The only place where it can live is in your own psychic life. And when it lives there, you are abnormal. But you can use this past as a wonderful way to see how your own background developed and unfolded. The lessons that you can learn. You can wander through the galleries of this great museum and see many interesting, wonderful, and even beautiful things if you can get the right attitude toward it. And the right attitude is free from regret. It is free from all these things because yesterday is no longer ourselves. It is a dead thing. which is important only because within it will be found locked the records of living forces that have moved that way. Having thus freed ourselves from the burden of being forced by nature to perpetuate the past, we can also get away from a great many rather obvious troubles that burdened our ancestors. For example, this desperate effort to perpetuate family, to perpetuate clan and level and caste. All of these things belong to the same situation. They're the individual trying to keep the dead alive and gradually burying himself in a false past, a past that has no value except in terms of now. If every individual would make his present decisions from a thorough understanding of his own past decisions, the quality of decision would improve 100% immediately. The moment we learn from what has happened to us and recognize that the lesson is for our own use, the moment we can do this, we can achieve a great deal. But we cannot do this until we remove from the past the blame which we have placed upon other persons for the unfortunate aspects of it. Another person having performed a wrong action does not create this past. The thing that made this action important is that we met it wrong, that we compounded a felony. Another person did something that was not correct. We reacted to it on his level instead of on our own. He was unkind, so we were unkind. This did not solve anything. It simply doubled the unkindness. It is not what this other person did. It was our own inability to adjust to it constructively. Our own inability to react better than the person who injured us. If we had acted more wisely, the injury would not have been an injury, it would have been an invitation to growth. Now, it's hard, after many years, to look back upon some brittle and unpleasant situation and take this attitude toward it. But if we do not achieve this, we will not achieve immediate or future serenity. We will not have the peace with which to meet the problem of the time. Nature is working constantly to give the individual victory over the circumstances of the world around him. The purpose of nature is not to build a better geological structure at the moment. Its purpose is to build into this world human beings bigger than the world, who can achieve a victory over it. A victory over it in terms of a victory over their own common conduct. And it is the world in the terms of 2.75 billion human beings that concerns us. The problem that we have East-West, Communist China, Soviet Russia, these are not problems belonging to nature. They're not of the earth or of the sky or of the air. These problems are human nature. These problems arise from ancient roots. They are the result of cause and effect unfolding through time. And most of them bear witness to ages of man's inhumanity to man. These problems must be solved. And there is no more solution for the individual in wrong answers and wrong attitudes than there was for the world situation. The individual who is not bigger than a hate, the individual who cannot be stronger than an injury done to him, the individual who cannot forgive or forget, is in no way superior to the problems which now burden us. There is no use for the person who can still be intolerant to claim that Russia is intolerant or China is intolerant. These intolerances are made up of private intolerances like our own. The answer lies to get rid of our own. And in getting rid of them, we also release ourselves for more constructive action in the common world of helping other people as far as we can to see through their own difficulties. So serenity consists not in world peace, but in the establishment of a quality of peace, which brings serenity to ourselves and world peace to the world. Well, there are many causes of trouble, but there is only one attitude of unity which will ultimately bring peace. The individual must be for it or against it. There can be no middle ground. Now, some will say that it is perfectly possible for us to live well, do the things we should do, be kind to everybody, be just as loving and gentle as we know how, and still be miserable. And I have noted that there is quite a strong delegation in that particular camp at the moment. That again is a matter of the person who is really not sold to his own idea. The individual who started out reluctantly to try to be better than he is comes to the reluctant conclusion that getting better doesn't change him. It is part of a pattern. It is a beautiful little psychological pitfall. It is definitely true that the individual who tries to be true to his principles will not find life easy. But he will find that it is easier to be true to yourself than it is to compromise yourself. Each person will ultimately discover that while right decision carries responsibilities which may be heavy, wrong decision carries difficulties that are tragic. And right decision has in it more of serenity and more of security because the individual can at least get along with himself. The person who compromises his own values cannot live well with himself. And as we must live with ourselves, this conflict can gradually result in the most desperate physical circumstances. To live in a subconscious condition of being ashamed of our own conduct means ultimate sickness and misery. Whereas living in a certainty that we are keeping the rules whether other people are or not gives us increasing strength and the gradual victory of our own consciousness over the conditions around us. Therefore, it is not true that the person who tries to behave himself has a harder time. Because if he is really moving from principle within himself, he also has resources of value, of understanding, and of inner security, which are far greater than the problem around him. This is perhaps very clearly pointed out in the case of Socrates. For certainly we cannot say that Socrates, through a philosophic life, was spared the ultimate tragedy of martyrdom. But to Socrates, this was neither martyrdom nor a tragedy. It was something that he looked forward to with the greatest serenity of spirit, pointing up what we all have to finally learn, namely that the integrated person, the individual whose standard of values is real, cannot be destroyed by circumstance. Nor can he recognize the kind of tragedy that burdens us. He has simply outgrown it. And we each outgrow tragedy to a degree when we grow into the realization that value is more important than compromise. Tragedy arises from man's ignorance of value. And the person who knows value can suffer, can go through problem, but he cannot experience tragedy. It may be that others will describe it as tragedy, but there is no tragedy for the person whose inner consciousness is integrated. He is greater than his circumstances, and circumstances can no longer bind him or hold him. Thus, serenity arises from the enrichment of these values of character and conduct, whereby we gain the understanding to keep the rules that we know are necessary. And by keeping them, we escape from all of the sorrows and miseries and inconsistencies of those who break them. Now we have another pattern we have to face, and that is man's inevitable attitude toward the future. If the past can lock us into one kind of a dilemma, the future can also beckon us into another. The future is the result of emotion. Man is not actually totally building future. It is true that his conduct is going to affect the future. There is no doubt about that. But the future into which he is moving is something which he cannot actually, factually understand. The future is always bigger than the individual, because it must be everybody's future. And unless we can understand everyone now, we cannot understand their future, which must mingle with our own. Consequently, it is a great mistake for the individual to set up a crystallized, concrete pattern of the future. He may have dreams that he hopes to fulfill. He may have aspirations which he regards as proper. But he must keep all of his own future in a state of solution. He must keep it in a state of suspension. He must say, these things I wish, I hope, but not my will, but the divine will be done. The moment the individual creates a future which is inflexible and toward which he will move regardless of consequence, he proceeds to batter his own head against a stone wall. He also opens himself to the inevitable suffering, because regardless of what he has believed or thought, the future will not fulfill his present expectancies, and if it does, it is a dismal failure. Why? Because if his expectancies, by the time the future reaches him, are not greater than his present expectancies, he has died somewhere on the way. So to say, this I want 10 years from now, is a kind of madness. Because all we can say is, this I want now. And if 10 years from now that is still essentially the same desire, that person is either very, very wise or very, very foolish. Wisdom only in the sense that his desires perhaps would be for virtue, for truth and understanding. Those will never change. But his desires for temporal things, for the gratification of ambitions, satisfaction of emotional desires and things of that nature, cannot be so projected safely. And many individuals are in bondage to their own dream of the future. If they get it, they will be bitterly disappointed. Also, along the way of this desperate effort to attain a particular, they have lost the wonderful opportunity of adjusting with a constantly changing world. Adjustment which might have brought greater penetration, greater understanding, and greater wisdom. So we've got to keep the future in solution. We must not lock ourselves in our own future, nor in the future of those around us. We cannot say, this I decree for my children. This I will do for my family. This I will do for my community. We've got to be ready and willing and able to serve. But we have got to keep in solution in order that the needs as they rise can be met. Otherwise, with our mind locked, we will miss all the things that are really needed. And by the time we attain the future, it will be obsolete. We've got to keep more flexible on these problems. And this is especially so today, because the future is moving toward us more rapidly than ever before. Time becomes more and more ethereal, more attenuated. We live more in a day now than our ancestors lived in a year. These changes mean a constant flexibility. And this is one of the Zen points in connection also with serenity. Serenity is volatility. It is continuous life. Serenity arises from the individual who has no points of tension or stress or crystallization which will interfere with constant motion. It is like your Taoist philosophy, where you have water as the symbol of man. Water, which is the most movable, the most flexible of the elements, according to the Chinese. If you place water in a square container, the water is square. If you place it in a round container, the water is round. If you place it in a blue bottle, it appears blue. In a red bottle, it appears red. If you drop it into a lake, it disappears entirely. But no one can say that it is gone. It reaches the sea and is picked up by the heat of the sun, carried to the mountains and dropped in the streams again. It is forever moving, forever in motion. And in the Zen philosophy, the true human being, the true consciousness in man must possess this volatile, flexible value, something that prevents crystallization from ever blocking the growth of the individual. How shall he attain this crystallization? How shall he attain freedom from this crystallization? He goes into himself. He goes in to search for motion in himself. And in the Chinese and in the Eastern systems, motion finds itself located or locked in the consciousness center. Man as consciousness is totally alive. As consciousness, he is not only all life, but he is all sufficient life. He is all knowing, all being. Man as consciousness is total. Man as form, mind, emotion, body, he is not total. He is conditioned. He is highly limited. And one of the expressions of this limitation is sluggishness, the inability to move freely and rapidly, the inability to adjust immediately, and yet adjust without compromise. Consciousness adjusts to everything, but never is less than itself. Water takes all shapes, but it is never other than itself. The individual who compromises, therefore, does not fulfill this requirement. He has lost his own center, giving something else power over him. But true consciousness is adjustment without loss of value. It is the individual graciously associating himself with everything, but remaining eternally true to his own value. He is the observer, the participant in some things. He is the student. He is the individual seeking better ways by not allowing himself to accept completely existing ways of anything. This possibility of being in a perpetual adjustment without compromise is a very interesting and gracious thing. And I think perhaps it sums up in the fact that it is possible only under one condition. and that is that if we give the same right to another, we may adjust to all situations without compromise, only if we will permit others to do the same. The moment adjustment on our part interferes with the right of another to adjust, this adjustment ceases to be natural and becomes tyrannical. If we are perfectly willing to let others be themselves, we buy or earn in this way, in some manner, the right to be ourselves. Thus, our achievement of this conscious adjustment means that we do not have tension arising from the offense of the conduct of other persons. Let us say, for example, that we are seeking to achieve adjustment in some situation that has arisen. We want to achieve this adjustment without conflict, without stress or pressure. Therefore, we move into this situation without any desire to dominate the situation. The moment we try to dominate the situation, our own pressures begin to build. We are not interested in dominating it. We are interested merely in sharing it. We are interested in being present as an observer. We will keep our hands off of the situation, yet we can be in it. We can move graciously through it. We can counsel, help, and direct to the best of our ability, but never for one moment taking it on as a cause of mental or emotional strain to ourselves. The physician has to learn this in working with the sick. The psychologist has to learn this in working with the tension-striven. If these persons took on the ailments of those who came to them, they would soon be dead themselves and in no condition to help anyone. The only way in which we can really help a confusion is not to take it on. The moment we take it on, we are sick with it. So the Zen tells us that we can move very quietly into a situation, neglect no part of it, evade no responsibility of it, remain ourselves completely, and yet not take it on. Now that's a trick. It might take 25 years to perfect that technique, but it's worth it, because it is a technique we can live with for the next million years. It is the problem or the process of being able to gain the most because we have not allowed ourselves to be deceived in any way. The moment we take on any situation, we open ourselves to be deceived by it. The moment we assume it emotionally, we must be for it or against it. The moment our personality moves in on it, we are for those parts which are like ourselves or please us, and against those parts which displease us. And in a short time, we're down in the scrap along with all the others, having totally lost our own perspective. And in this action, destroying our right to help anyone else. If, however, we can move through these problems, recognizing it is our gracious privilege to bestow all that is necessary from our own resources, but that it is also our right to withdraw that which we bestow if need arises, that it is also our right to bestow without involvement. We do not want to go to a judge who is prejudiced. We can do nothing for a person truly if we are prejudiced about them. We do not want prejudiced witnesses any more than we want perjured witnesses. The only individual who wants a prejudiced witness is himself dishonest. Thus, we do not want prejudiced help from others, and we cannot give help ourselves if we are prejudiced. And if for one moment we lose sense of true value, we will be prejudiced. And the moment we become involved in prejudiced action, our own miseries increase. So the only way in which we can serve truth is to remain unprejudiced. The only way we can live truly and live fully and serve adequately is to do so from a pure level of conviction. The moment we try to discriminate between this and that, we fall into error. The only thing we know is right for us is to keep the rules and keep the law. The moment we take our solid stand upon this, we may increase our responsibilities, but we will also increase our usefulness and our securities. In the Zen teaching, there is this problem then of this serenity factor. The person who has found ways to express value in himself and through himself. He has gotten rid of the false notion that the world depends on him, and the equally false notion that he depends on the world. He has come rather to the realization that he depends upon internal, eternal value, that his first allegiance must be to this, his first dedication must be to this, and whatever he performs in the form of action must move from this and not from his personal will. He must remember, as the Scriptures say, that it is the Father in him that doeth the works. It is not ourselves, but the law moving in us that alone is true. The moment we shift allegiance from this pattern of law and try to make up our own private patterns, we get into trouble. One of our troubles, of course, is this problem of passing judgment as though we knew. And we find in the New Testament some very important recommendations. Jesus telling his disciples that it was according to the old law, that you judged an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And it was also in the old dispensation that men should learn to judge justly. But Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, "But verily I say unto you, judge not at all." Now there is a tremendous cure for a great many things. And that is that the individual who is looking for serenity can find it by judging not at all. Now, not to judge does not mean that we agree with what we regard to be wrong, but we leave what we regard to be wrong in the law and do not attempt ourselves to play God. And this is tremendously important. Condemn not, lest ye be condemned. It is not up to us to play God. It is up to us to let God move as far as possible through our own beings, realizing that we live in a universe of value, and that this value is so great and so eternal that all things will be perfected in their own way. We may think we know when another person is right or wrong, but we may not know. But out of judging him, out of condemning him, we lay away in ourselves negative attitudes that we must live with. If we do not agree with him, if we feel that he is wrong, we have a right to cling to that which we believe to be right. We have a right to cling to our own principle, to serve the truth we see, to keep the laws we understand. But we have no need or right to determine the merits or demerits of other persons' conduct. If it is acceptable to us, we accept it. If it is not acceptable to us, we leave it quietly in the law. We do not compromise our own position, but we do not pass judgment. This in itself will save us a great deal of trouble and tragedy, because most of our disquietudes, as perhaps we are beginning to realize, come from breaking basic patterns and rules in our own natures. Now, the world around us is filled with pressures. We are living in truly anxious and difficult times. It is therefore especially valuable that we realize that under the external pressures, our internal resources are challenged. More and more is being demanded of us as beings to keep our sanities, our health, and our constructive attitudes. To keep these attitudes, to live with them, we have got to release more and more essential understanding from ourselves. And if we will do so in a quiet manner, we will have values with which to build and work. There is no reason why the individual, because of world pressure, should live badly. There is no reason why he should be any more afraid now than he was 1,000 years ago. Because if we have adversaries now, they had them then. The brave man of 1,000 years ago had just as much courage as is necessary to the brave man of today. Because in each individual's life, the collective crisis is unimportant. The only crisis that is important is that which bears upon himself. Regardless of what happens to the world, he can only be born, suffer, and die himself. He has always had this to face. And regardless of whether it was from a slingshot, a rock, or atomic bomb, makes no essential difference in the universal pattern of things. Either he is courageous, understanding, wise, and serene, or else he isn't. And it is the same problem that has had to be studied and solved since the dawn of time. The person of today can solve it. Anxiety is simply lack of integration. It is lack of the individual's making use of his own resources. It is largely due to carelessness. He has no time with which to work out his own character. He is wasting knowledge, wasting life, and wasting his own experiences because he is not using them to restore his own sense of values. So it is perfectly possible by simply releasing a measure of personal stress to live an ever more serene and significant pattern even in these times, and especially in these times. Actually, the pressures that come to men are their great opportunities. The more difficult the time, the greater the opportunity that the individual has for victory. Therefore, this time is most important, and we sincerely hope that out of this present crisis will come the most important decisions men have ever made. For never before have we been so strongly and inevitably confronted with the necessary decisions of life. We are reaching a point where we must decide if we intend to survive. Out of this, and by virtue of this, we have a wonderful day of privilege and opportunity if we wish to make use of it. So we have to make use of it. We have to make use of it by drawing forth out of ourselves all these resources. Therefore, today we have the greatest opportunity, the greatest inducement for self-integration, the greatest inducement to realize that there has never been a moment in our lives when we could not live a serene and well-balanced existence. The only thing that stood in our way at any time was ourselves. And the proof of this is inescapable, because in every generation, under every pressure, under every type of misfortune, human beings have attained serenity. If one individual in a generation can live well, then the entire generation can live better than it does. If one person that we know is able to control themselves and use their energies constructively in these times, we can all do so. It's a matter of getting to work and doing it. And to get to work means to give up something that is less and strive for something that is greater. All we are asked to give up is uncomfortable living. All we are asked to sacrifice is misery. And yet somehow we have clung to these troubles so long that we love them better than we love happiness. They mean more to us than security. We have built our entire life around insecurity. That is because we have built it around externals. Our present problem is to move that life into ourselves and build it around internals and eternals. As we do this, our security increases. And we are serene because we know that we live in a universe of divine law, divine love, and divine wisdom. These will not and cannot fail. And trouble is simply due to the fact that we fail to keep this realization clear in ourselves. And if we can clarify this realization, we can meet the future with hope and understanding and increase our own usefulness to ourselves and others. But we have got to have this internal sense that there is a plan, that it is operating, and our trouble is that we do not see it. Learn to see it, understand it, and our doubts and fears will give place to an eternal admiration for the wonder, the wisdom, the glory, and the love in which we all exist, if we only had the wit to understand it. Well, time's up. Now, next week you have a vacation. So next week, next Sunday, you can make a clinical experiment on how to live without anxiety. Make next Sunday a day of great peace and of great adjustment, and see whether or not you will not find more of light shining through the moment you permit it to shine. Now, I'd like to make a few announcements. Our Sundays begin here on July 13th, and our Wednesday evening class begins on July 16th, and the class will be devoted to problems of consciousness, and the opening Sunday morning lecture will have to do with the problem of atomic fallout and other factors in atomic research and what they may mean to us in the next few years. So we have an interesting subject, I think. I'd like to also call attention to the fact that we have a number of books on the table for the friends who are interested in rather good and inexpensive books dealing with philosophy, metaphysics, and related subjects. We have a copy of one of our own books that's been out of print for a long time, Words to the Wise. This book is missing from many of those who are attempting to collect our writings. We also have copies of L.W. Rogers' books, Dreams and Premonitions, which is an interesting book. Way of Initiation by Steiner. Conscious Immortality by Dodds. A number of interesting items, and small books also. So be sure to look them over while these inexpensive volumes are obtainable and while we have a good selection of them. Also, if you are not on the mailing list and would like to be on the mailing list for our next program, may we have your names and addresses before you leave this morning. Also, consider our regular line of books and our magazine. We hope that you will subscribe to it, and I think you'll be interested in the material that we are developing for it at the present time. in the next 2 or 3 issues will be a continuation of articles relating to the therapeutic methods of Paracelsus. And I'm now working on a digest of the notes of our recent class on Atlantis, so that you will find our magazine contains much of material that is of interest to you, and we hope you'll subscribe. Now, we hope you'll have a very pleasant 4th of July, and we'll all meet here on the 13th. Thank you very much.